We have a great program today, and I'm already 1 minute late starting, so I'd like to make up for that if I can. I'd like to call the September 23rd meeting of the Coronado. It's not working?
Not on.
Nope. Nothing. Nope.
It was just
It's called ONOFF.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. I'd like to call the September 23rd meeting of the Coronado Roundtable to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The Coronado Roundtable has had a long tradition of telling jokes.
Mike's not on.
Let me get
Thank you. Let's see.
Nieto.
you.
There we go.
Okay.
Oh!
Yeah. All right. The Coronado Roundtable has had a long history of telling jokes, and at one point in time, I hit the wall after spending 3 hours trying to find a joke. And last month, Dave Landon reintroduced the tradition, so I'm going to try again. So we're in a 6th grade classroom, and little Johnny is sitting in the back of the room. He's not paying too much attention. So the teacher says, "Little Johnny, tell us what you know about George Washington." And a long silence. Well, in order to save the moment, the teacher said, "Okay, little Johnny, was George Washington a soldier or a sailor?" Little Johnny responded immediately, "Oh, he was a soldier." And the teacher said, "Well, little Johnny, how do you know that?" He said, "Well, I saw a picture of George Washington crossing this big river, standing in the front of a small rowboat, and no sailor would ever do that." So, okay, we're back. You know, the Coronado Roundtable has been meeting in this room since 1983 or 4, and in those earlier days, we had very little need for support other than a microphone. But now we have this program is being recorded, it's being taped, and will be available this afternoon on the YouTube and Facebook pages of the library. It's being Zoomed to a wide audience. How many do we have on Zoom? 6? 13 people on Zoom. That's probably 24 or 25 more people. That's really good. And today we have a new twist for the people on Zoom. When the question and answer period takes place, there will be a second microphone, and the people watching on Zoom for the first time will be able to hear the questions. So that's a big advance. And we'd like to give credit to Tara Davies and Selena Valladolid over here for giving us our support. And of course, we have our coffee from Lyman Green. We greatly appreciate his support. Now, for those of you watching on Zoom, I need to say 3 things. First, you should hit your mute button so that the conversations you're having at home stay private. Second, you may wish to turn the camera off so that we're not viewing what's going on where you're located. And third, we're encouraging you to use the chat box to present your questions. And we will make sure that some of your questions are asked during the question and answer period. A couple of comments about a future program. Next month, that's October 28th, we have a speaker from the International Boundary and Water Commission. Her title is U.S. Secretary. Her name is Sally Spinner. Now, that commission is located in El Paso, Texas. And the person who was originally scheduled to come here to speak that day can't come for a very good reason. So she designated Sally Spinner to come and make that presentation. Now, what's unique about Sally is that this month she moved to Coronado. So, and the title of her presentation will be Border Sanitation Projects to Keep the Beaches Open. So that will be an outstanding program. Our November speaker is yet to be confirmed. Our January speaker is going to be Dr. Susan Stone, the CEO of the Sharp Library. And our February speaker will be our Port Commissioner. So at this point in time, I'd like to introduce Admiral Steve Clary to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, President Kirk. Thanks very much. Well, good morning. Great to see so many of you here for this important topic of conversation. We are really pleased to welcome David Edick back to the Coronado Roundtable. David is an authority on global energy, and he's going to talk today about natural gas, and in particular, about how Russia's war on Ukraine has upset global supply and demand, and particularly altered Europe's security outlook. The EU has decided to end imports of Russian natural gas by the year 2030. David will address that today in some detail. Is it even feasible? After many years of working abroad in Russia, David also brings an on-the-ground perspective on the Russia-Ukraine war, and he will be happy to talk about that after the break during the question and answer period. David is a principal in the Core Global Advisory, a consultant firm focused on energy, commodities, political risk, and market strategy. He lectures widely throughout the area on energy finance and geopolitics. David's also been long active in the international civil society community here in San Diego. He served as the president of the San Diego World Affairs Council and is the past president of the San Diego Vladivostok, Russia Sister City Society. David is a graduate of San Diego State and lives here with his family in the area. Thank you all for coming. David, thanks for coming back.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No. How about that? It's a little better, but let's have some more.
Try now?
Better?
Just need to talk louder, David.
I can talk louder, but I want to avoid that ring too.
Try now?
Yeah.
How about this?
Take the mic.
How about this? All right. It's great to be here again with the Coronado Roundtable. I got a bit of a background ring. How about this? It sounds a little better without the ring. Can we go? Awesome. No? Let's go. All right, so I'm delighted. I may have too many microphones going here. That's better. Now it's off. That's back on. Without the ring, we're good. Okay. Thank you all for taking time out of a beautiful morning here in Coronado to come out and hear me talk about, well, kind of a depressing topic, but it's a hot topic. And for those of you that have an interest in geopolitics, this is front and center as to what's going on. And then ultimately down the road, this is going to find its way into your wallet. Just hang on for that. So in the second half of 2021, Europe experienced an extraordinary crisis in natural gas, the price of which just exploded. Looking from 2006 over to 2021, things were pretty stable here. And then just blew up. This was before the war. So the war took place starting officially February 24th. That previous slide is this. Then the war broke out, and then the fade, and then the shutdown of Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 1 being the primary avenue for Russian natural gas into Western Europe. So today, my plan is to talk about Europe's natural gas profile, give you some background to work with, okay? Then I will talk about the European Commission's Repower EU policy, which came out the door in March, just a few days after the invasion, but was finally passed in May. Then I'll talk about the competitors that Europe faces on the road to repowering EU and its pursuit of natural gas from sources other than Russia. I'll talk a little bit about renewables. I'll address the question, is US LNG the answer? I'll also look at impacts on European industry and consumers and touch on a few concluding comments. All right, looking at this graphic on the right, this is Europe's energy profile, if you will, their primary energy, around 38% of it from oil, about a quarter of it coming from natural gas. It's an important part of Europe's energy profile, having overtaken coal from previous generations, renewables, nuclear power, and some hydro. Over here on the left, this is consumers of natural gas, the United States being the largest, the EU second, Russia being third. On producers, big mismatch between Europe, their consumption, and their production. And this is 2019, it's pretty current data. Norway, big producer, important for Europe. Australia, big LNG exporter. Qatar, big LNG exporter. Russia, 60% of Russia's primary energy is from natural gas, and they are second to the United States in production. Looking back over a couple generations in Europe, this red line fitting this side of the graph shows that back in 1970, basically Europe was self-sufficient in natural gas. But over a two-generation period, increase in demand and declining production brought Europe to a point where about 10% of its production is done within the Union, the rest being imported. And within this orange zone, in the early days, as Europe's natural gas industry was founded really originally on the discovery of an enormous, absolutely enormous, one of the world's largest natural gas fields ever discovered, called Groningen in the northeastern part of the Netherlands, on the order of 3.5, 4.5 trillion cubic meters, absolutely enormous. And that reserve predated by 10 years discoveries in the North Sea. And about the same time, Algeria began to send LNG to France and to the UK. But very quickly, the European Union moved from a coal-based economy. Natural gas became the powering vehicle for industry and for home use, home heating, et cetera. And domestic supply in Europe didn't keep up. And it's in this period that the first deals with the Soviet Union, with small pipelines running through Austria, and then ultimately, if you remember back to the Reagan days, much larger, large-scale export pipelines from Western Siberia into Germany were built. And so Russia has come to have a very large part of Europe's natural gas supply. Add on the back of this a bunch from Norway, and let's look at some numbers. So I want to look just briefly here at Groningen, because this is an important development over the last decade. Running from very large production. Remember, there was about 100 billion cubic meters per year produced in the EU this last, in 2019. A big change. A lot of Europe's gas production became lost. Why? Earthquakes at Groningen. They produced so much gas that the ground began to compact, a very complex geology on a very big field. And those earthquakes happened where earthquakes did not happen before, where houses, the construction methods and construction materials were vulnerable to modest shaking. I mean, a 3.5 earthquake, we wouldn't really think a whole lot of it. But a 3.5 earthquake on bricks is not a good thing. And really quite a bit of damage and a lot of psychological freaking out, you know, just when your relatives come in from the East Coast, right? And we have an earthquake here, you know, just a lot of hand holding, right? So the Groningen was closed down and is expected to shut this year. And that long goodbye has taken a big chunk out of Europe's capacity to supply itself. Back in the 90s, the big growth in European gas demand was unification with Eastern Germany. The inclusion of the East into Western German methods, not so much grids per se, but putting away lignite in favor of natural gas, just to clean up the air, clean up the environment. I mean, this is not pansy stuff. I mean, it's pretty toxic conditions in a lot of those cities in the East because of the lignite. So big changes within Europe's production profile. In Europe, this natural gas is used to generate electricity. It's used to heat buildings, houses. It's very important. And it's very important in industrial uses. And many of these industrial uses, it's very difficult to fuel switch. In metals refining, smelting, et cetera, you can't really use electricity, and to refit it to use other fuels requires years and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in investment. So, a little takeaway. Over a decade prior, just to give you an idea of how things looked flowing into this current period, domestic production in the EU, imports from Norway. Norway plays an important role in Europe's natural gas market. This was never a Russian monopoly, and it's always a mistake to speak of it that way. This is primarily Algeria's contribution, Russia. You can see in a bit of Russian growth. Remember that Groningen fade? And LNG. LNG has always been a factor for Europe. It's expensive stuff relative to cheap, inexpensive pipeline gas. I mean, this is the cheapest, it's the most inexpensive natural gas really in the world, was. Currently, here in the last year, some very, very big changes. Russia's contribution into Europe is in collapse. Partly because Europe wants it that way, but Russia's joined the game. There's a war that broke out in Ukraine, physical war of armaments. In response to that, the West essentially declared an economic war under the fancy name of sanctions. And the Russians have responded to that, using the weapons at their disposal and thereby weaponizing energy, including natural gas. But the politicization of natural gas and other energy materials, that took place a long time ago. Norway holding its ground, LNG really filling in, and the big change here is from the United States. These are Russian pipeline flows, different pipelines. The key one for our discussion here, okay, so last year, the gas market is driven by demand first. Supply answers to demand. So there's been a lot of talk about what was going on here. It's a complex story, quite frankly, but ultimately, this is what European buyers wanted to happen. in the face of ridiculous prices, and how to manage that from a company perspective. How do you manage inventories? How do you manage contracted incoming supplies? But with the outbreak of the economic war, firstly with the arguments over whether Russia would be paid in rubles or in dollars for gas, but then ultimately the technical jokes, and it's really kind of silly season, especially the final shutdown here of Nord Stream. And Nord Stream's offline, and it's not coming back anytime soon. There is still gas flowing from Russia into Europe, though, just a whole lot less. What is flowing into Europe is coming through Ukraine on the Progress line. And it's also still coming into Europe through Turkish Stream into Southeastern Europe. This makes it all the way into Germany. So there's still Russian gas getting into Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary. So Russia's maintaining gas flows really for geopolitical purposes at this point. Just for perspective, Norway, big pipeline flows, crucial for the UK and for Northwestern Europe. Nord Stream, both closed. This was ready to start, closed, closed, closed. The Polish and the Russians got together on that, basically. Closed because of the war in the East. Still open. Algeria, prolific resource, a big-time supplier, especially into Italy. A substantial supplier of LNG into France. Pipeline gas into Spain. Some of you will recall the Abrahamic Accords that were concluded during the Trump administration a few years ago. One of the consequences of that was a decision by the White House to support Morocco's interest in the Spanish Sahara. That royally teed off the Algerians. The Spaniards support the Moroccans, and this down here is called Spanish Sahara for a reason. This line has now been closed as of November last year. The Algerians told the Spaniards to take a hike when the contract ran out. But you should keep in mind that there's, even though this line is still open, the opportunity for it to be closed is very much a possibility. But Spain has LNG capacity that most countries don't have. These blue squares show existing, it's a couple years old map, so there's a few additional facilities on, but you can see them along the coast of various parts of Europe. In addition, Russia is a substantial producer and exporter of liquefied natural gas. This is all still coming into Europe, but it's complicated. Qatar, US is much bigger number now. Nigeria is important. Africa will present part of the answer for Europe. De-Russification. Okay, this is a done deal in terms of the decision made. And I'm not so sure how well considered it was, but that they've embarked down that path and there's no turning back. Is it possible? It is. At what cost? It's going to be a lot for everybody. And that's not just Europe. Everywhere on the planet will pay a price. So for what Europe wants to do, in 2021, they were importing 155 billion cubic meters by pipeline. That's about twice of what California uses, if that makes any sense. But it's a big number. And changing big numbers is always a challenge. But the Europeans, the European Commission said, well, we're going to import between 2021 and 2027, 30. They're going to make these changes, right? They're going to fill in this hole. There's a war on it. You know, what are you going to do in the interim? You know, I mean, it's like the expectations are kind of like everyone was like the Russians, dirty dealers that they are. They're gonna sit there and they're gonna wait for 6 or 7 years for the demand to be shut off. Well, you know, all's fair in war. I don't know about love, but definitely war. So Europe is going to import a lot of LNG, more than they are now, a whole lot. Maybe some more pipelines. You'll hear rumblings about the East Mediterranean. No. Maybe some Azerbaijani gas. Yes. Electrification. Biomethane and green hydrogen. Basically, these two categories do not exist right now. So while some interesting stuff is going on with biomethane, think in terms of current production, like 3.5, not 35. So to scale these two is going to require monumental investments. And for green hydrogen, that's riding on the back of, in particular, wind investment. And I think this is just massively aspirational, but it's editorializing. Europeans think the plan is to do 2/3 of this change. Okay, they got between 2021 and 2027-30, they're going to try to do 2/3 of it this year. 101 billion cubic meters. 50 of it, LNG, all of it, bang, going to happen this year. Wind and solar. Okay, it's kind of a political document. I'm just calling it as I see it. Behavioral changing. This is conservation, but ultimately this is going to be demand destruction. And this is going to be a very big number. The demand destruction. And the consequences of that will be considerable. Biomethane, okay, they're giving themselves a chance that they could get started. During the year, every winter, it gets cold. And there's a big surge, Northern Europe in particular, big surge in demand. People turn the heat on. This is what storage is for, to take care of these peaks. And while the storage is supplying those peaks, the pipelines, the LNG flows. Problem this year is the pipelines are not going to flow anywhere near like what was planned or what would normally be the case. So while storages are being decently filled in Europe, and there's a lot of, you know, yay, we've got this. That's the easy part. Storage is filled every year. Last year was a complicated year, and that's why prices got weird. You can see LNG becoming a bigger factor, but LNG is the most expensive form of natural gas in general. But these peaks. So this is a graphic showing, this is what happens if you take Russian natural gas out of the picture. And remember, there's still some flowing, but only a fraction of what it was. We're in September, and we've been going through summer. Okay, and these would be the Russian contributions during kind of a normal year. No problem. Now comes the cold weather. This is really when the dependence on Russian flows will hammer. And either supplies will be sourced elsewhere, or they'll figure out what to do without. But these winter months are an immense challenge to remove Russian gas from the picture, especially to try to do it now in 1 year, less than 1 year, like today. So for those of you that are curious and don't know, it's okay. LNG, liquefied natural gas, is natural gas that's been cooled It's methane cooled to 260 degrees below zero. And it goes from a gas and collapses down into a liquid. Big savings of space. You can put it on ships and send it around the world, special design ships, and you send it to special facilities abroad that handle that liquid and turn it back into a gas. LNG does not flow through pipelines. Gas does, natural gas, but LNG might flow through a pipeline a few tens of meters. That's it. It's in these big tanks. Just real quick on what a floating LNG facility is like, and this is going to be a popular bolt-on, certainly for Germany this year and elsewhere. You have your LNG tanker, it offloads into this degasification ship. It's kind of a mix of storage. Degasification facilities, basically they use seawater to warm up that liquid gas, turn it back into a gas, then it goes into the pipeline grid. What's 50 billion cubic meters? For those of you that are interested, that's 36.5 million metric tons. What's 155 billion cubic meters? 113 million metric tons. Basically, Russian exports to Europe in 2021 are equal to the entire US LNG infrastructure existing today. Just realize that they are committed to supplying a lot of different markets. This is a look at the global perspective, the total global LNG demand. A global market has developed over the last generation. It used to be point to point. Now it's much more of a fluid market, but there's still a lot of long-term contracts and long-term commitments. US LNG is particularly flexible in terms of contract commitments and being able to redestination, if you will, to change the destination. But in Australia, their LNG is financed by Japanese utilities and others. And because of that, the flows go from Australia to Japan or to Korea, which did facilitate financing, and Chinese companies as well. So there's not going to be a lot of Australian LNG coming onto the market. There's a little bit. But the Asian utilities, they want their gas. Because if they don't have it, they get to explain it to the governments. It's done a little differently there. But anyways, this is the world situation. The change in Europe, Europe's change in course, is going to change the trajectory quite substantially. One thing that's not on this is that the demand destruction worldwide, this is the prices that are existing now are really hurting the market. And there's kind of some scandalous stuff going on where tankers of gas that were contracted for by, say, Pakistan or by India, those contracts were broken. The trading companies paid the break fee. Here, we'll cut you a check there. But you don't get the gas for sending that to Europe. And oh, by the way, they're going to make a couple $100 million per shipment kind of thing. You know, you pay a few, maybe $10 million break fee. The Germans actually are doing this to the Indians right now. The Indians have contracted for LNG through a Singapore affiliate of Gazprom. And the Germans took over, put under trusteeship this corporate network, if you will, that was Gazprom's in Western Europe. And India depends on gas for its fertilizer manufacturing. But the Germans have said, here's the break fee, we're taking the gas. This price action here, this is what's called the Japan-Korea marker. It's one of the price markers, if you will, for East Asia. It's the reference for all kinds of gas business, but other energy business as well. Pay attention to this. But this is for the Asians. TTF is a virtual grid, is a virtual price point in the Netherlands. But you can see how the two they track each other very, very closely. And what this signals is competition for LNG. There was a wicked cold snap before all this hoo-ha got started, a wicked cold snap in Asia, and they got the gas. Then the last year, before the war, huge spike in prices. Initially, the Asians said, we're going to pay, we're taking the gas because it's winter. But winter turned out to be a little bit mild in East Asia. That secondary spike blew out the JKM marker. The gas, all those flotilla of ships that you read about going from North America, going to Europe, a bunch of those ships turned around in the Pacific. That was Europeans whipped out the wallet and they paid the price. And this is going to be a dynamic that will go on for years going forward. This competition between Europe and Asia, and looking at the global market. So that just the blue here showing that the Asians are significant players in LNG. That's very important for their electric utility world. Crucial. And if they can't have it, they're going to be burning fuel oil. They've already turned to coal, and this is part of why you get this the sudden urge or move to go back to reopen those nuclear facilities in Japan. And you can see Europe has a role, but the Asians are in the market. Looking at prices around the world, yeah, summertime. And this went to 100, but it's pulled back to say, let's just say for discussion's sake that these numbers are today's numbers. They're not that far off. Henry Hub in the United States, TTF in Western Europe and the Netherlands, $40 difference. This is where you can make $200 million per tanker load by shipping it. So if you've got LNG, get it to Europe, and if there's enough capacity to unload it, and that's a big problem for Europe over the next, certainly the next year, probably for two, is having enough capacity in the right place to take this LNG from anywhere, let alone the United States. St. Petersburg Index. Yes, there is a gas market in Russia. It's a free market. Beyond the Gazprom fixed stuff, there's quite an extensive free market. Indian gas exchange, Japan marker. This is an important dynamic right here. So the Australians are big LNG exporters to East Asia, and the flow, the pricing is very closely tied. Not so many years ago, this is like $4, $5, $6, and this was 6, 8, 10. Basically, to move gas, liquefied natural gas, you take this Henry Hub number, you add 2 for liquefaction, and you add another 2 to ship it. So your landed cost in Europe is going to be roughly 11 and change. It's a pretty big markup. The thing to watch here is that this is what we are exposed to here in the United States. It will take a little time to develop, but it won't happen, and then it'll happen all of a sudden. And US gas prices will really move. So over the next 3-4 years, some of it could happen this year. I mean, prices are already beginning to dance and the same kind of music. These prices are going to go much higher. And what does this mean for electricity prices in the United States and our advantage in manufacturing of petrochemicals, et cetera? It's going to come under some pressure. Even though right now there's a big move of energy intensive manufacturing from Europe to the US, I'm not sure how long that's going to hold up. And for whoever is in office, that is going to be mighty inconvenient politically. they will pay attention. For renewables, this red shows the production behavior in 2021 of the nuclear sector in Sweden. Okay, Sweden's a small country. Okay, well, what this does, this is a really great signifier, and shows that wind generation, wherever you are, and they're not far from the North Sea, but you get this kind of behavior everywhere with wind generation. It's very noisy. And it's really difficult to you not only have to integrate it, but you also have to be able to respond both to the production spikes and declines. And you have to overbuild your capacity immensely to really be able to base your grid on it. We can get into this on another time, but this is something actually that's an issue for California. Even though solar has a different behavior, this big heat wave that we went through recently, when the sun sets, solar fades. And California found itself doubling down on its aging natural gas power generation capacity, and as usual, importing from out of state to solve our problem. And we got mighty close to a breakdown. In Germany yesterday, 9 a.m., wind production, tremendous capacity, but almost zero. It was a sunny, calm day. And the German grid was powered by coal and wood, okay? Fancy name for biomass is a fancy name for wood. That's at the PhD level, by the way. I don't have a PhD, but I mean, that's and then gas, and gas being very, very important. I mean, basically the Germans are bailing out the French in their nuclear problems this year, and that's gas-fired power from the Germans, it's and from the Brits. But anyways, this is yesterday. This is somebody to pay attention to. Robert Habeck, he's the head of the economics ministry, economic affairs and climate. He is from the Green Party, but out of all the people in Europe, this fellow really impresses me as a very quick study. He learns fast. I don't care for the nuclear decision, but nuclear in Germany is politics, and it's not done. That politics is not done. I remember where he comes from. Okay, and the politics of Germany and the roots of the nuclear issue in Germany are 2 generations old. This is not something easy to be dealt with. But this guy is somebody you really want to pay attention. I think he's building himself something big time career, big time. The Germans are definitely taking action. Last year, importing 46 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. This year, they've got a bunch of floating LNG facilities they're installing. Unfortunately, post-pandemic construction schedules are slow. Everything's delayed. Really, these are going to come on in the first and second quarter of next year. Too late for winter. Not only that, they're still out there negotiating for LNG supplies. So while Chancellor Scholz says we've got the problem solved, they haven't half solved. They're buying facilities that were based elsewhere in the world, and they're coming to Germany. Wallet. So they are going to solve this. Qatar is one of the big LNG producers in the world, and they have been already before this was going on, they were planning to regain their global leadership in LNG production. And the Germans showed up and said, well, you know, we really are interested in some of that. But the Europeans are one of the big challenges that they're facing in this de-Russification is a clash between energy security and decarbonization. For a generation now, Europe has been a world leader in attempting to decarbonize. It's a different topic for a different day, but it's a serious topic. And they have made some very important political and institutional decisions that are going to be set on the shelf. And the politics are going to be very, very difficult. And some of the business is going to be difficult for them as well. But this is a huge clash. And my view is that basically this war in Ukraine is going to set back global decarbonization a decade. And maybe a little too much, but I think I'm comfortable with saying that in public. I mean, the Qataris, they want long-term contracts. And if you won't give us a long-term contract, there are others out there who will. And you want a long-term contract, and we want to make sure that it goes to you specifically. We don't want you to send it someplace else in the world, like US LNG might allow you to change the destination. Qataris want a lot of control, and they are in the catbird seat, and they know it, and they're really driving a hard bargain. But ultimately, Europeans are faced with this decision. You're either going to make long-term contracts for gas, or you're going to go into the market just constantly into the spot market and pay peak price. And it might not be there. That's not a way to run a serious energy system. And energy is the foundation of our civilization. You don't have it, things don't move. And, you know, energy is what allows, it puts ideas and physical materials into motion. And if you don't have energy, those things don't happen. And so you can have an economist will tell you that, well, you know, GDP will be only affected this much by not having it. It's actually a whole lot more complicated than that. If you don't have the energy, stay home. And it might be cold that day. So is the US the answer? The US is going to have a role to play in this for sure. Looking back over the last decade, the last year, this complicated last year, these are the destinations of US LNG. That's Spain and France, Korea, UK, Netherlands, Turkey, Japan, China, Brazil, India, Taiwan, Poland. Regionally, you can see Europe. And this is on the basis of price. This is not based on being nice. This is business, pure and simple. You pay the price, you get the gas. There's lots of happy talk between DC and Brussels. And one of the challenges to this de-Russification is that neither DC nor Brussels are really serious about the fact that this is a long-term, this is a decadal plus decision, a process that will have to be financed. And the private companies see all kinds of uncertainty out there. And they finally are answering to their shareholders. Wishful thinking, boy, hopium is it's a problem, okay? So for the United States, this is what's currently open now: Sabine Pass, Cold Point, Corpus Christi, Alba, Cameron. Oh, Freeport, they're closed. They had an explosion in June. Explosion and fire. It wasn't a really bad one. But what it did, when they overpressurized the pipe, what? You're professionals and you overpressurize a pipe? What's going on with that? So a little digging, and it turns out that they got a long running history. They have a problem with safety culture at Freeport. This is a huge part of US LNG export, and it's being run like, well, let's be fair, but it's not being run well. And so this is offline now, and the whole thing, and will be coming online late this year, November, December, and by the beginning of next year, we'll be back up and running. But from June through now, this has not been available. And this has been a complicating factor for Europe it's helped keep US natural gas prices a little bit lower than they might have been. But a problem. So between now, basically, this line, September 6th, to January of 2026, this is what's coming online in the United States. Golden Pass, Corpus Christi Stage 3, Cheniere, plaque mines. Corpus Christi's got a bit of a problem because the bridge, the new Cross Harbor Bridge, the Corpus Christi, massive bridge to replace the old harbor bridge. Corpus Christi's become a big US oil export port and is about to become a big LNG port. And LNG and big tankers, they are big boats. The old bridge doesn't allow comfortably for the passage of those tankers or the widening and deepening of the canal, of the channel. The construction of the bridge at Corpus Christi is suspended as of August. The Department of Transportation in Texas shut down this Dragos Flatiron joint venture saying your design is unsafe. Big deal. I mean, they got the towers up. I'll come to it. So this is really 2021 numbers, okay? The US is actually now pulled into the lead as the world's largest LNG producer and is actually producing overrated capacity, which is impressive. It shows what you can do if you really dig in and pay attention and focus. This is the planned expansion up to 2025. This is financed and under construction. And this is the dream. Okay. If this dream comes true, well, maybe the Europeans will be okay, 2030. I mean, yeah, there's a war on. There's a war on. Qatar, Australia, Indonesia, Russia, all of this is now stalled because of sanctions. And until the Russians figure out how to do liquefaction, and they're trying, not successful so far, they're stuck. But this was going to be big for them going into the future. Mozambique on the east coast of Africa actually is going to become a major supplier of LNG to Western Europe. It's significant. Canadians are finally going to step in. There's a project underway in northern British Columbia. This will be primarily for the Asian market, but could free up some gas for elsewhere in the world. A list. Let's not worry about that. This fire and the explosion and fire, that was quite spectacular. And just a real enormous wake-up call. These are very complex pieces of engineering. High pressures, just pretty tough. And if you're not paying attention or if you're sloppy, get this situation here at the Harbor Bridge. It's a great thing on YouTube, Practical Engineering. I highly recommend you take a look at this. Really, it's a lot of fun, knowledgeable person. They've got a big problem. Back at the ranch, we have another issue here in the United States. This is domestic production of natural gas. These are the drilling rigs, and there's been a decent move of rigs into gas, partly because of prices, but partly because the pandemic is ending. Very slow growth. This is the production side of the graphic. Basically going to add roughly 10 billion cubic feet over the period of 4 years. No. Is this the background for a big boom in US LNG? Well, if it is, this is the recipe for a big price spike in the United States. Frack gas is the backbone of American natural gas and now of US crude oil and natural gas liquids, which get included in the crude oil number. And you can see behavior, particularly, the pandemic, the impact of the Texas freeze. This was here in the Permian, big shock. very consequential. Texas freeze being primarily a gas story, not wind, gas. Big impact in the fields, freezing gas at the wellhead, way before electricity was a factor. And then, oh yeah, by the way, the blackouts and electricity hurt. Frack wells, frack production, frack wells, and this is for oil, but gas behavior is very much the same. You have very rapid decline in output. So basically a third of whatever drilling you're going to do in frack world is going to be to fill in the hole of depletion of the previous year. So in order to run a frack industry, it is massively intensive capital-wise and material, labor, resource intensive, big time. And you're always scrambling. It's a very different world than drilling on a North Slope or in the Middle East or Siberia, West Siberian gas fields, or the Troll for Norway, Troll gas field, very different world. And this behavior is really important. You take your foot off the gas and you'll be years trying to catch up to where you were producing just a few years before. And that's what we're seeing in both crude oil in the US and in gas. That is going to have, I mean, the reality is that US production is not capable of supplying that dream LNG expansion that I showed, you know, the 2030. There's not the gas. The gas is not there to do that. And I suppose if you're willing to pay, you know, 5 times what your utility rates are now, I just don't see that being politically or economically sustainable in this country. The answer for Europe's gas de-Russification, there'll be some here, but we're not the solution. But I will tell you that in Brussels, they came into this thinking that we were going to be the answer. Texas, fracking, you know. Sorry.
Dave, could you go over that list just briefly? There might be some investors that would be interested in that list you went over.
The names?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is the Corpus Christi. This is already made the final investment decision. They're actually building the pipeline now into Corpus Christi off some of the other gas trunk lines, the gas coming out of the Permian. A lot of the prep infrastructure is already underway. So what we have here is capacity and what's already been contracted. You can break contracts if you pay a price, okay? Energy Transfer is a big infrastructure company. They're going to do it. If I'm in the gas business, Freeport's down the list for me in terms of business. If there's somebody else out there, I'm going with them until they prove otherwise. Too much risk. Another infrastructure company, next decade. These guys are worth paying attention to. Sempra. Now, on this list, these are US projects. Sempra has a project south of us near Ensenada, Costa Azul, that's currently an import facility and they'll move to export. They also have plans for a big facility in Sinaloa. But all of that's pulling gas from the Permian. Tellurian, I mean, oh gosh, the Lebanese guy, I can see his face. This is hoped for. And honestly, I think this is kind of a bellwether to watch, because if they get financed, it'll be the last one. And if they don't get financed, it'll have been a bridge too far. And this is Plaquemines, which, as we saw on a previous slide, they're going to get built. Invest at your own risk, let me tell you. Yeah. Big challenge in Europe. There's also a financial aspect to this. Gas and electric utilities they sign contracts, long-term contracts forward. They guarantee they're going to supply you electricity from this period of time, da, 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 da. And they're in the futures market. They're hedging big time because they want to protect themselves on the upside and the downside. I think it'd be nice to make the upside. What energy companies do is they invest for stability. And because of the explosion in prices, it's essentially created this massive balloon. And to stay in the game in hedging margin calls, they have to come up with an enormous pile of money, something on the order of $1.5 trillion in cash. But they only take cash at the clearinghouses. They don't take credit. This is a big issue. Germany, the federal government just took over Uniper. Why? Well, the main reason here is that Uniper had long-term contracts with Gazprom. Long-term contracts at nice, juicy, low prices. Gazprom is no longer delivering through Nord Stream. Uniper has had to go out into the spot market and fill that hole, buy gas to make commitments. And they were losing on the order of $100 million a day. Uniper was owned up until a couple days ago, was majority owned by a Finnish company. So they paid the Finns. It's a big step. It's about stability. It's about keeping the heat on. It's keeping the lights on. This is not some sort of, sailing off into the world of socialism. They're going to sell this back. But this process is very rough. What are the consequences of high prices for energy, especially natural gas? This is a picture of the closures, partial and total closures in the fertilizer sector in Western Europe. When prices took off last fall, natural gas prices, fertilizer prices went with it. And so these companies, these facilities stayed open. But fertilizer prices plateaued this last year, and gas prices took off. So there's a massive closure of fertilizer operations across Europe. Okay, so a little while ago, we were talking about energy security. What about agricultural security? Okay, it turns out that there's a lot of moving parts here. Cause and effect and binary thinking will get you in trouble, guaranteed. Steel industry, partial shutdowns, total shutdowns. US Steel and Slovakia. The aluminum industry. Aluminum industry expects half of capacity to be offline by the end of the year. Half. And it's not, a lot of this stuff's not going to come back. I mean, these kinds of things you don't turn on and off. They're immensely expensive to restart. Pulp prices, going back to the year 2000. Bang. German industrial gas demand is down a bunch. July this year or July 2021. Utility rates in the UK, going back to 1970. This is on the front page of the Financial Times, a little bit of cut and paste with my camera. Boom. That's where we're at now, where things are headed. You want to be prime minister? Really? Okay, so basically the first thing that Prime Minister Liz Truss did was to pass this cap bailout program, where over the next couple of years, they're going to spend somewhere on the order of 150 to 200 billion pounds. They could stop paying income tax in the UK for a year. And there are other comparisons. This is an enormous number. This is like a multiple of the defense budget. Multiple. And it only covers business for 6 months. So come the springtime, somehow I think prices aren't going to be back to normal. They're going to have one interesting discussion over extending it. And the unfortunate thing about this is they're not paying for it with taxes. They're borrowing. So this is going to come home to roost in good old politics. You're going to hear the argument about, well, you know, spending's out of control. Yeah, okay. So, but basically a third of the British public is in serious trouble financially in terms of paying their bills. I'm just giving you a little taste here. I mean, we've experienced nothing like it here in the US. Just to look back, it's a big number. They'll get this, but they're going to push Pakistan, Bangladesh, and really squeeze India, who is actually playing hardball in this. They have the muscle. So where are we going? Much higher natural gas prices worldwide for years. Volatile prices as the seasonal interplay. Winter, Europe and Asia compete for LNG. Slow growth in US LNG production. It's pretty well mapped out for years into the future. There's no shortcuts to it. There'll be some modest growth in African LNG production. A warning, slow growth in US domestic gas production. Elevated US gas prices, potential supply squeezes. Severe impact on global fertilizer prices and food production. We're not talking about famines. We're talking about weak yields and high prices. We're talking about the quiet starvation in the dark. We're talking about grandma dying at 51 instead of 57. We're talking illness. We're talking about generalized weakness in the population. And the more income stressed people are, the more this is a factor for them. It will be insidious, but let me tell you, they know it already. And this is one of the key reasons, it's one of a couple of big reasons why the low-income world has said, war in Ukraine really sucks. But you guys, we have issues with this, and we are not going to get into bed with you and sing with your sheet of music about what this means for the world. Our interests are different, and they are material. They're existential. This is not voluntary. This is not about values are great, but if you don't have food on the table, or if you don't have access to, anyways. This is really the big thing that's going to happen for Europe over the next few years. Supply, there's going to be some, but it's not going to fill the hole. What will fill the hole is demand destruction. Not conservation, closure of fertilizer facilities, etc. You saw it. This will be a turbulent and expensive transition. Europeans are facing a permanent structural cost increase and partial deindustrialization. This will change. Europe is the EU is the world's largest economy, and it's a lot of people and a very complicated political scene, as you know. This kind of shock is going to push them to the limit. Thank you.
Is this a good place for a break?
Yep.
Coffee break and return for question and answer. Thank you very much. 5 minutes.
to go. And as I said earlier, there's a 1 o'clock program in this room and we have to exit at 11:30. So I don't want you to think we're shortchanging you or cutting you off for our convenience, but that's the schedule for the day. So Mike Napolitano will manage the question and answer.
The first question comes from Zoom. How much does the severity of winter affect demand? I think you answered that already.
I touched on it. I don't think this is working. It depends on what you mean by severe. And we all know that it's a spectrum. But back in 2018, in February and March, they had this thing called the Beast from the East, which was just a brutal cold wave, blizzard conditions, and it stressed the North European power and gas grid to the limit. And at the time, the Russians kind of came to the rescue. Not going to happen this time. It depends. It's the short answer, but it's a very consequential situation. And if it's a cold winter, they're in trouble.
Next question from Tim LaFleur.
Thank you for the presentation. Interesting. What's going to happen with Russian gas? Is China going to start taking more of that, which frees up LNG that other countries might have been sending to China to go help solve the problems in other places?
Got it. That's a good question. And that's a relatively common question, and it's a good one. So Russia is not exporting so much gas to Europe now. And what they're doing is they're keeping it in the ground. And that's what they're going to do. There is some gas flowing from eastern Siberia into China, Russian gas from eastern Siberia. But there are no pipeline connections between the West Siberian fields and China, or the markets in their east. There is discussion about a pipeline, Power of Siberia 2, that could do that. The Russians had great hopes for LNG because that allowed them to deliver anywhere in the world without being tied to a pipeline. But they're in a jam. They're in a jam, but they'll keep the gas at home. And you got to realize that Russian culture, Russian political culture, this is not a business or an economic motivated society. I mean, money has come to mean everything for some. But in terms of politics, geopolitics, and strategy, we're going to have less money. Okay, next. But they're going to keep the gas in the ground because they've got a use for it. And there's always tomorrow.
Next question, Bill Carrinder.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Very uplifting. My question is about these LNG ships. It seems to me that those things are just floating bombs. Yeah. And, have any of those ever exploded, or what's the safety procedure on this?
It's actually pretty safe stuff. So LNG is a liquid. It turns to gas and is lighter than air. The explosion that there was a very bad explosion at an Algerian LNG facility a couple decades ago, maybe. Blew out 3 of their trains, but it turned out that it was pipeline that was the source of that. They had a leak in the pipeline. Liquid gas actually is pretty safe to handle. It's when it gets into the pipeline actually is degasified at volume. But when it's in an ambient situation, a spill or something like that.
Does it have to be refrigerated on the ship?
It does.
Yeah. So that's an energy usage right there.
It is. Yes.
Next question, Morgan Miller.
Oh, Ben, thank you for a very enlightening presentation. To me, this screams the open up all those nuclear power plants back. And you can't turn on a dime there. But you mentioned briefly a little bit about the French something problem. So I was hoping you could delve a little bit more into the nuclear issues, like with Japan and France and maybe even the US. Thanks.
Okay, so Japan is kind of an easy one because Fukushima was a terrible shock. And a Japanese society had a considerable amount of faith in its engineers and their institutions, and that they could manage things, and they were wrong. I mean, there's the marker on the hill. You know, it's 869, big tsunami, and they had the generators in the basement to cool elevated waste pools, but they had the generators in the basement that would handle cooling for the rest of the thing. Anyways, the break of faith, the crisis of confidence in Japan is a very serious one, and they'll have to find their way through it. But they're pragmatic people ultimately, and they will. The French situation is a very interesting one in that, so France, normally about 80% of their electricity supply is nuclear. And it's been a great story for France, an export story, you know, in the green decarbonized race, you know, it's like no carbon. You know, it's nuclear, but not a carbon emitter. But they have extended the life of their reactors. And there was a wave of reactor builds that essentially Frenchified a Westinghouse design, which is it's okay. But in the extended life, as I understand it, the extended life, they began to get corrosion at a particular point in I want to say the cooling system, but that gets out of my sense. But this problem is in a large part of the French fleet, so they shut them down. And the French nuclear fleet is operating about 50% capacity right now, and they are in a race to get the stuff back up, which is kind of not a good thing, you know. I mean, nuclear, you know, safety does come first. Safety, you know, look, I mean, safety culture is not about being pansies. Safety culture is about organizing, being resilient and responsive. So, I mean, any company, engineering company in particular, you know, has got safety culture. I want to be a part of that. That's a well-run operation. But the French nuclear industry has become politicized for some time, and the energy industry across Europe has become politicized, and it's become politicized here in the United States, and that's not a good thing. The French will get their power plants back up. The Belgians have decided to keep a couple of their facilities up. The Germans will come around, but it's not an easy thing because these plants were nearing the end of the fueling that they'd had in. I mean, it wasn't just that they were pulling the plug, I mean, they kind of played it out. So in order to keep things going, there's a lot also that has to happen. Repowering civilization will be the most difficult thing that human society has done, modern society. And we don't have a resilient system. Our human society is not in a resilient space. But to change out, so the Europeans in a way are doing this crash program. Yes, it's about de-Russification, but it's also a warning about the consequences, the shocks, the unintended consequences of big change. How do you finance it? What are the consequences? What could go wrong? And when you're running a grid, or heat for my mom, she's in her 80s, really sensitive to the weather. Let me tell you, she tells you about it. I worry about it's going to take her to the hospital. Something's going to go wrong. Small stuff becomes big stuff. But anyways.
Next question, Harvey.
Thank you very much. My question does not deal with Europe, but the rest of the world. My question deals with the United States and the little funny Lebanese guy from Cheniere who founded it, who has a new company, along with Mucor, along with high-tech aluminum. They all say that they're going to start building facilities on the Texas-Louisiana coast because the Eagle Ford, the Haynesville, and the Permian can supply the most low-cost energy in the world to them. Do you anticipate an increase in United States manufacturing capacity based on our internal usage and not so much export?
So currently we're using about 88% of what we produce. We do import from Canada and we do export by pipeline to Mexico. They were the biggest losers in the Texas freeze, actually. The Mexicans took it in the neck for many days, didn't have electricity or heat. So I understand the narrative. Okay, Suki, the Lebanese guy. He's the one. He's the founder of Cheniere. Okay, he's really the father of the U.S. LNG industry. Smart guy, very capable business. You know, when he started doing it, people thought he was nuts. Okay, we're going to be importing natural gas, but it turned out fracking was real and very prolific. Problem is that so Haynesville is going to see a lot of activity, and that is where a lot of drilling is. And his driftwood operation, they are trying to build this LNG operation on the basis of their own in-house gas production. That's an interesting idea. They've got a long way to go. As I see it, and I'm not alone at all, U.S. gas production will struggle to grow for years to come and will be vulnerable actually to interruptions. It would be great if we could get some more infrastructure, say in the Marcellus, Mountain Pass pipeline. That's good for our domestic situation. And we got to do something about the Northeast, which is very vulnerable. But the reality is that growth in the U.S. is going to be slow at best. And there's going to be competition between uses. So the power sector, electricity generation sector has come to depend tremendously on natural gas. It's sideline coal just everywhere. And a lot of that coal infrastructure is aging anyways and is reaching the end of its physical life. So gas has been the go-to thing. What's coming is a kind of a storm of competition. U.S. has a serious LNG industry. It will get bigger. It just won't get big enough to really materially change things for Europe.
And next question will be, unfortunately, the final question.
I hope I can rise to the occasion. Look, I'm sorry. You know, I'm not an expert in anything really, but when you talk about these matters, it seems to me the first question you should ask is this a matter of lifestyle? In other words, are you allowing the people who control the energy resources to determine how people on Earth should live? And you should tailor the lifestyle that you have. I'm assuming that we're starting by saying that we want to have the people on Earth, okay, that we want to deal with the life of people on Earth and make whatever compromises are necessary in order to make the energy sources we have available to give us the best life we can have.
Right. So we have a lifestyle, we have a way, we have developed an ecosystem of supply and demand. And there are, through history, looking across decades, you'll get waves of change. And those waves take time. And there will be change in Europe. They will manage their way through ultimately with a different economic structure, with a with lifestyles adjusting. But change, big change is revolutionary stuff. Sometimes with a small r, sometimes with a big R. Big changes are really by their nature disruptive. Sometimes good things come out of it.
Nothing is inevitable. I mean,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I really, you're asking a really good question. And I'm trying to respect it, because I think it's the philosophical grand overview of what it is that we're all dealing with here. And there are those that are stuck in the bucket where the only thing that matters to them is money or quarterly reports or political posture. You know, you've got a particular view on something, you got to be right. And if I'm right, that means since you're saying something different, you're wrong. I will also say at this point that the thinking in terms of geopolitics, what's being pursued through the economic war with Russia was not well considered. I get the goal, but my sense is that our elite, our political elite, our country, we're about 20 years off the pace. The world has changed a lot. And part of the consequence of this experience is going to be our waking up. Europe is waking up in different ways. Some of it, it's unfortunate that we're out of time. That's the great question to finish on, because it was the most, it required the greatest perspective, the widest perspective.
Let's have a big hand of applause for Dave. What an interesting presentation, and as it's our tradition, we have a little gift for you, a ballpoint pen made specially for you in China. So thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.